Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session. So today we are looking at example sentences. We're going to be looking at an IELTS Writing Task 2 essay. This is going to be an advantages outweigh the disadvantages essay. For anyone who's watching this on YouTube, I've been joined with some of my students, and we will be looking at their example sentences, seeing if they're relevant and seeing where they could improve it, if at all. Before we start, just a couple of things about example sentences to prepare you for this. The purpose of an example sentence is we're supporting the idea we introduce in the topic sentence. So remember, that's what you should be checking it with. Whatever you introduce in your topic sentence, which should be your main idea, that's what we're giving an example of. Your examples do not need to be true, but they do have to be believable. Okay, so don't try and come up with really extreme examples. Generally, it's a good idea to avoid made-up statistics. Again, if you have some statistics which are believable, it's okay. Problem is, for many students, they come up with statistics which are not particularly believable. So if you use statistics, they do have to be believable for them to be considered as effective. And also, we don't want to use personal examples in academic writing. Okay, so avoid personal examples, be more general examples. Just a note for examples, if you're trying to give a solution, so if a question asks for a solution, you need to show some kind of result. We can't just go, okay, someone implemented this solution. We need to show they implemented the solution worked for it to work. In multiple idea paragraphs, you only provide one example per paragraph, and that is for your second idea. Okay, so let's get on with today's question. So this is the question that we've been looking at. The world should have only one government rather than the national government for each country. Do the advantages of this outweighs disadvantages? So we came up with some ideas. So we're going to have a look at the idea for our first body paragraph. To start with, so the idea for the first one was advantages. And we said that if we had one government, then immigration procedures would be a lot less problematic for people. So it's something you want to think about when looking at examples here. First, this one. Think about a specific group that might have difficulties with a specific area of immigration now, and how would that be fixed? So maybe you yourselves have had issues with immigration, moving to countries. What were the issues you might have had with immigration, and would it have been easier if the world was just run by one government? So for all examples, make sure you signpost them. So somewhere we want to see, for example, or what else could I use as well as for example? Yeah, for instance. Let me just write this down. And whenever we write, for example, for instance, what punctuation do I need? Yeah, I need a comma after this because it's an introductory prepositional phrase. So you can either of these. Again, we don't need anything fancy. I've seen all sorts of crazy introductory phrases that people come up with for their examples. All we need is, for example, for instance, super easy, but we do want one of these expressions either at the beginning or in the middle of your sentence, just to indicate that we're giving an example, because then it's very clear to the examiner that the explanation has finished and the example has started. So make sure you put these in. And the other thing I noticed a lot of students will tend to do is after this comma, they'll start their next word with a capital letter. So after commas, no capital letters. So, blah, blah, blah. So I'm going to throw this over to our students. If you're watching this at home, try writing an example for this at home, and let's see how my comments to the students will apply to you. So over to you guys. What examples have you got for this? See if they are relevant or not. I think definitely examples are one of the hardest part of the body paragraph. So like I said to people at home, use this time while my students are thinking and writing to think for yourself. Okay, so Rajat. Rajat, capital letters and full stops. Yeah, I'm glad to see this. Well, I'll say, for instance, brilliant. Migrants who apply for US visa often face lots of difficulties in order to get a visa. So they are often in the favor of having a single government because it allows them to have to go through less immigration rules. Okay, so first off, we're going to fix some language issues here to make this a little bit clearer. So migrants who apply for US. So what is our issue with this? We're talking about visa in general. So what do we need to do here? So if I'm talking about visas in general in English, when we're talking about something in general, we have to make the noun plural. Excellent, what a Mary. So migrants who apply for US visas often have to face lots of difficulties in order to get a visa. Okay. Here, because we've, I know Rajat hadn't actually originally made it plural, but now we've got this plural thing here. Maybe we could say to get their visa or get these visas. Would work a little bit better to get their visas. So they are often in the favor of having. So what would this expression be? Something's not quite right. Gabby, excellent, yeah. So the expression is there in favor. So this is like a fixed expression, so you just remember people are often in favor of having is good, having a single government. Having a single government because it allows them. So does this single government exist at the moment? So basically we say this is hypothetical. So it doesn't exist. So if we're talking something that is hypothetical, so it's not real at the moment, but we're kind of talking in the world of the subjunctive. We have a modal verb. So Nabila said will. There's a better modal verb than will. Begins with the same letter. People often get will and this modal verb confused. We say it would. So if you have this hypothetical, we can use would because it's not a real situation or even likely to be a real situation. Will is much more of a prediction for the future, but we're not really predicting there's going to be a one world government, so would be much more appropriate here. So they're often in favor of having a single government because it would allow them to. So rather than saying allow them to have to, you just allow them to go through less immigration. So are they going through rules? So you don't really go through a rule. What would you go through? Procedures, yeah, that would be better here. So they often favor having a single government because it would allow them to go through less immigration procedures. Okay, so now our vocabulary and grammar is fixed. What do we think policies goes through? No, again, the problem is this go through. So you don't go through a policy, you don't go through a rule. So you can go through a procedure, but you can't go through a rule. You could experience rules or face rules, I guess, or experience policies, but go through would be, so our whole collocation here is to go through and then here, procedures. I think this certainly actually of the various options, this would be the best, go through less immigration procedures. So what do we think about an example here? Is it specific? Yep, so we're talking about US visas. They're finding it difficult to get their visas. I think this is good. Is it relevant? Would the one world government fix this issue? So I think it's relevant. What I think is maybe a little bit strange here is they are often in favor of a single government. So I'm sure if you went to let's say you went to an airport where people are trying to get a US visa and they're facing all sorts of difficulties, and you say, what would you like? Do you think many of them are going to go, I want a single government? They're probably going to say, I want less immigration procedures, but they're probably not thinking, oh, I want a single government. So maybe here we could say, they face difficulty. So they, rather than being in favor, they would benefit from having a single government because it would allow them to go through less immigration procedures. So now, again, all of this, we're using this would benefit, would allow, because it doesn't exist, it's all hypothetical. Again, we're not really saying, you're going to these, like you go to the border of Mexico, they're going, oh, I want one world government so I can get into the US. But they would certainly benefit. So the language here is a little bit clearer. Now I think we have a much better, someone said less or few. Well pointed out. So less goes with uncountable nouns. It's not few. What should it be? Tomorrow. You're very close. We're talking about a comparison here. So Tamara said, shouldn't it be few instead of less? Aha, Rio, what a fewer. If you said few or a few, it means not many. But here we're trying to show a comparison, so we need this comparison. But yeah, well done. I often miss this. We should use fewer for countable nouns, and we should use less for uncountable. So well spotted. Okay, so as I said, now I think this is a much better example. Let's go on to our next students. I saw one in the chat somewhere. Okay, on from tomorrow. So, for example, many people who want to live in another country have to pass IELTS. So if one government would exist, people would not have to have a lot of issues to tackle. So here we've got a conditional. So when we write conditionals, where do we put the modal verb? In the if clause or in the other clause? Not in the if, yeah. So never put your conditionals with the if clause. So I see you're listening to what I just said about this is non-existence, but if you have a conditional, so if one government exists, because it exists, people would not have, and then you can put your conditional here, people would not have a lot of issues to tackle. So here, I'm looking at this, and we've basically got two parts. We've got they have to take IELTS, and government exists, they don't have lots of issues. Does part 1 and part 2 connect in this? Rajat was saying will instead of would. So here would is fine because you're showing this a hypothetical, but will is also possible. There are various modal verbs you could use instead of will, but will is also correct. But looking at this, so this is talking about IELTS. If one government exists, people would not have a lot of issues to tackle. Is this connected to IELTS? So Rajat says, yeah, not relevant. So how can we make it a bit relevant, a bit more relevant? So the problem is this language is too vague. They have lots of issues. What are these issues that they don't have to tackle? So we're trying to relate this to IELTS. So if one government exists, people would not have, what would they not have to do, which is related to IELTS? Aha, tomorrow, I think that's a bit better, yeah. They would not have to pass an expensive exam to do what? Why would they not have to pass an expensive exam? To apply for a visa. So now we're being a lot more specific and everything's connecting together. So many people who want to live in another country have to pass IELTS. Okay, good. So we see here we've got a problem. So if one government exists, people would not have to pass an expensive exam to apply for a visa. Excellent. So we've got a solution. We're showing how this connects now to a unified government. So do we think this is a good example? Yeah, really specific. So excellent, well done. I'm going to move on to our next slide here. So we do this, because I reckon we got quite a few people. Okay, so Nabila's got one. Look at this. I'll look at the others in a second. For example, Latin Americans have to go under different procedures. So what was the preposition we said? This came up in a previous example. We don't say go under a procedure, it's go through. Good job, Roger. Yeah. So Latin Americans have to go through different procedures to apply for a visa to enter the US. And after doing all those steps, not everyone obtains it. Having one global government would reduce the situation. So you can't reduce the situation. So what would be a better expression here? Yeah, you could improve the situation. let's have another go. Latin America is going through lots of steps to get to the USA. So we've got very specific people. So, okay, so having one global government would improve the situation. So we could have improve the situation. Maybe we could have maybe a little bit clearer here, make it easier for them to enter. So again, just saying improve this situation, a little bit vague, like make it easier to enter, very, very specific. We're talking about the entering. So for me, this is a little bit more specific. But good, we're talking about Latin Americans going into the USA, so it's a very specific example. We're definitely showing that this one government would make it easier for them because they're not going to have to go through all these steps. So good example, relevant, well done. What happened there? So for example, before the European Union was created, the number of procedures that people needed to do when migrating between these countries were very problematic. Now it's easier for citizens to travel around these countries because, it's just a typo, they do not need visa. Okay, so are we talking about one visa or visas in general? Visas in general, so this definitely needs to be plural. So it looks specific. Let's try and fix a bit of language here. So before the European Union was created, the number of procedures that people needed to do. Again, I quite like this. Go through. It's a slightly more natural. When we talk about procedures, we go through a procedure. Do is possible. I just think this is a little bit more specific or a bit more natural. The number of procedures that people need to go through when migrating between these countries. So we say these countries, but we don't actually know what these countries are because we haven't referred to countries before. We've only referred to the European Union. So we could say the countries, these countries in Europe. Number of procedures that people need to go through when migrating between were very problematic. So what is our subject? What is problematic if we're looking at this grammatically? What is very problematic referring to? Aha, Mary, good. The number of procedures. Not the procedures, but the number of procedures. So are the number problematic or are the procedures problematic? So I would see that the procedures are problematic. So here it would be better to say, for the European Union was created, the procedures that people needed to go through when migrating between the countries in Europe were very problematic. Good. But now it's easier for citizens to travel around these countries because they do not need visas. Okay. What do we think as an example? Mary says yes, definitely specific. Tamara says it's relevant. Ah, well spotted, Nabila. Yes. Is easier or it is easier? It should be it is easier. This expression comes up a lot in English. It is easier, or it is easy, or it is more difficult, or it is difficult. So it does need the it here. Any other questions with this? Tomorrow, very practical, yeah. Any questions from you guys about this one? Or should we move on to the next? So it is easier, yes, tomorrow. So Rajat says it doesn't mention about a single government. So what it's trying to show is you have a union. So the European Union is a union of countries. So it is a small version of what we're talking about. So this would be relevant because it is showing that when you create one single government, the countries within that group no longer have to do this. So the whole point here, it being a union. So yeah, it does work. Anyone else? No. Okay, let's go on to our next question. On here from Marisol. Don't worry, I'll get through everyone. So for example, Colombian citizens are one of the few Latin Americans that require a visa to enter the UK, which makes this process not only tedious, but also expensive. Okay, so when we're talking about visa, this word will be lowercase. So what do we think here about this example at the moment? Nabila says, yeah, it needs a result. So it's great. We're showing that we've got a problem. So definitely it's an issue for Colombian citizens. They need this, this visa, which makes this process not only tedious, but also expensive. However, there was a government. So what would happen if there was a one world government? How would we have a solution to this? Yeah, there would be less problems with migration. So we said not less. What should it be? Because problems are countable, Mary. Good. Fewer problems. Migration. Okay. So now this example is much better. So if we look at this, we've shown that there is a problem for these people, very specific people, that we've got Colombians. The Colombians are one of the few Latin Americans that require a visa. Good, which makes the process only tedious but expensive. However, now bringing it back to what we're talking about, having one government. However, if there was a one world government, there would be fewer problems with migration. We fixed it. So that works. And Nabila was saying, let's see, but we will use however in the next sentence. You mean when we are giving opinion statement? Sure. So what could we use instead of however? Yeah, we could maybe have despite this. So Gabby said, but. Can I start a sentence with but? No, why? And Reben, I'll get to your question in a second. What type of word X? Yeah, well done, Mary. So Nabila, it's not the fact it's informal, it's a coordinating conjunction. So you should never be starting sentences with coordinating conjunctions. So get in the habit. So the coordinating conjunctions are, do them in order so I can remember. Fanboy, so or and nor. For and nor, but yet. Sorry. There we go. So coordinated conjunctions are often known as fanboys because they spell out F-A-N-B-O-Y-S. These are words that should not start sentences. Okay. So what should you do if you wanted to use one of these? How do we use coordinated conjunctions? So let's say we have but here instead. Yeah, we simply put a comma before them. So this would be okay, but don't use these to start sentences because then the purpose of these words, the purpose is to join sentences together. Nevertheless, yeah, like you could use that instead of however. That would also work, Marisol. Reben was asking, do we need to state that Colombia is an unstable country? No. So the whole point of this is an advantage of unifying governments is that immigration procedures are going to become less problematic. So all we're focusing on here, Reben, is that immigration procedures are going to be less problematic. So at the moment, we've got a very specific example that Colombians have an issue getting a visa. And if we had a one world government, they wouldn't have as many problems. They wouldn't have as many issues getting visas, and it's going to be cheaper and less tedious for them. So yeah, this is a good, relevant example. Okay, we've got one from Mary here. For example, the major citizens of pretty sure Shenzhen is without the sea. Oh no, you're right, sorry. Your teacher can't spell. The major citizens, the majority of citizens of a Schengen country can travel and work in other European countries. Okay, so the majority of citizens, we're talking here, are we talking one country or the Schengen countries in general? General. So what do we do if it's general? Very excellent. Yep, we put an S on the end. The majority of citizens of Schengen countries can travel and work in other European countries without the complexities of getting a visa, as they are a unified government, which is the European Union nowadays. Okay, what do we think here? So is it, yep, it's very specific, which is important. So we're talking about Schengen, we're talking about the European Union, very nice. We're showing that they have less problems because they have this unified zone. And I think it was Reben that said, yeah, they work in other European countries without the complexities of getting a visa, as they are a unified government. Is it one government? What is the European Union? If I said to you, what is the European Union? Is it a unified government? We could have a union of countries, or we could call them a trading bloc. So maybe rather than a unified government, maybe a unified trading bloc. So for me, this is a little bit more accurate. So yeah, they're governed by one union. There is like obviously a European government, but they still have their own governments. I think calling it a unified trading bloc is a little bit more specific, or a little bit, sorry, I should say more accurate. It's a very minor detail. Does anyone see any issues with grammar? Mary, I think you did a really good job. Mary was saying it's really difficult to give an example. I think you've done a really good job here. It was just a language here, what the European Union is. To call it a unified government, I'm just being picky. So Gabby says, do we say other or another? So good question. So we're talking about European countries in general. So this is definitely correct. This is plural. So do we use another or other with plural nouns? Good, yeah. Mary says we use other with plural nouns and another. So basically the an is an article, which means one. So here we wouldn't use another European countries. Okay, so you use another for one, other for plural. And yeah, once again, we've got good examples. I'm going to make a copy of this. Okay, has anyone else in the chat got some examples that we can look at? Yeah, excellent. Okay, when visitors, for instance, travel to other countries, they will not need to be worried about money in exchange rates, and also be able to communicate with local people in one language, such as domestic travel. Okay, so first off, we're going to fix some language issues, and then we're going to see how relevant it is. So when visitors, for instance, travel to other countries, they will not need to be worried about money in exchange rates. So what is strange here? We can't have money in exchange rates. You can say they won't have to be worried about exchange rates or exchanging money. I think would be the best way to express this. And also be able. So here we want a subject. And so what is our subject? They, okay. So when we've got a number of verbs together, we put our also between the first auxiliary verb and the second verb. So they will also be able to communicate with its local. So we don't know what it is referring to. So simply, I think we can talk about local people in general. They will also be able to communicate with local people in one language. So, such as domestic travel. This doesn't make sense. What are we trying to say here? Maybe when they travel domestically. So are we trying to talk about a time period here, Ria? So they can talk to local people when, so we use a relative clause, they travel domestically. I think this is what you're trying to say. Okay. So we've got a couple of questions. Let's see. Gabby said, it is okay that it is not mentioning these problems as a result of not having one government. No, so we've definitely got an issue as far as an example goes. So Nabila said, what about immigration issues? Yeah, exactly. So we've got to be thinking about the advantage of unifying governments. Immigration procedures are less problematic. So do we have anything here about immigration procedures? Also, if we look at this, if you unify government, does it mean that the money is going to be the same? If you unify a government, does it mean the language is going to be the same? So we could take, for example, the European Union. If you think about the European Union, if you go from England to France to Spain, does everyone speak one language? Many languages, exactly. So the unification of the government isn't going to cause this. So we've got to be thinking specifically about the results of unifying governments and only focusing on immigration procedures. And at the moment, unfortunately, nothing here is dealing with immigration. So when writing your examples, highlight the key parts of your topic sentence, like I have here. So you've got unifying governments, immigration procedures. So make sure that you've highlighted the key parts so that we're only addressing that when we write an example. Because at the moment, this would not be supporting our main idea because we're not addressing immigration procedures. Okay, Labida. Let's have a look at this. No problem, Ria. We only learn from making mistakes. But as what would be really helpful, I think, for you, Ria, is making sure that you're like highlighting key phrases to make sure that you've got this cohesion. So the ideas from the topic sentence are continuing on to your example. So for instance, some people face a problem. So here we're talking about problem in general. So what do we do when we're talking in general? We put on an S, yeah. Some people face problems to sponsor their spouse. Are we talking about one spouse or spouses in general? Spouses in general. So again, we want the plurals here. So for instance, some people face problems to sponsor their spouses in some European countries, due to which family suffers. I would say rather than due to which, could someone think of a better expression here? Ooh, as a result, yeah, as a result. So that definitely works. Actually, I think that's probably the simplest. As a result. Some people face problems. So, however, if there is one government, So here we have got a conditional. So when we have conditionals, what's the punctuation situation? You have conditional sentence, independent clause. We always separate them with comma. There is one government. Many families would not face heartache of living away from their relatives. Here we're talking about specific heartache. So many families would not face the heartache of living away from their families. So what has this got to do with immigration procedures, unifying governments? So we want to be a bit more specific, because why was they not face heartache? And we want you to think of a situation rather than a thing, Mary. So try to think of a clause rather than a noun phrase. Give you a hint. Yeah. It'd be easier for their spouses to apply visas. Also, I just want to quickly go back here to the grammar issue. If you face problems, if you have this grammatical structure, that some people face problems, we always actually use the gerund here. So you don't face problems to, you face problems ing. Okay, so let me reread this and see how we're doing. So for instance, some people face problems sponsoring their spouses in some European countries. As a result, families suffer. However, if there is one government, many families would not face a heartache of living away from their relatives because it would be easier for their spouses to apply for visas. Okay, so let's go back to the topic sentence to make sure that we've got both parts. Are we talking about unifying governments? Yeah, because we've got if there is one government, so that's covered. Are we talking about immigration procedures and being less problematic? So yeah, sponsoring spouses in European countries, so that's definitely an immigration issue. Have we mentioned that it's going to be less problematic? Yes, because it's easier for their spouses to apply for visas. So we've covered all the important parts of our topic sentence, and now it's a lot more specific and directly addressing it. And we're talking about a very specific example, so much better. So well done, Nabila. And then Rebin had, still here. So Rebin, are you wanting me to use this one or the one you just posted? I'm guessing the new one. Yeah. Have an updated example. We take this one. Second one. Okay, let's have a look. So for instance, Iranian academians, so we see academics. Iranian academics on average have to wait 1 year to get the visa. Here, It's the first time you've mentioned the visa, so if it's the first time we're mentioning it, what article should we use? Visa, or we could say visas in general, use the S. So Iranian academics on average have to wait 1 year to get a visa to migrate to European countries where they can progress their careers. So is this a defining or a non-defining relative clause? Is it adding information or defining what European countries are? Yeah, it's adding information. So if we have a non-defining relative clause, we put commas around it. So where they can progress their careers. But if there was a unified government, this would be addressed. Right, so I think we're missing a preposition. It should be, we have to wait for. Let me have a look. Here. So this is optional. You could put the for in, or you don't have to. But apart from that, it's fine. So let me read again. Iranian academics on average have to wait 1 year to get a visa to migrate to European countries where they can progress their careers. But if there was a unified government, this would be addressed. And we'd want a comma here because you've got a conditional clause followed by an independent clause. So when the conditional clause comes before the independent clause, you put the comma. So what do we think? This is a specific relevant example. Nabila says good. Mary says good. Gabby says good. So yeah, everyone's saying good. I completely agree. So well done, very specific. Good job. Have I covered everyone in the group for their examples for this first question? Is there anyone I still need to look at? I think I've got everyone. Okay, good. So we only have 5 minutes left. So what I'm going to do is maybe just take the first 1 or 2 for the next topic sentence, just so because we've been working through this essay, we want to see how to address this. So the second example here, talking about on the negative side of having a single government in the world, is that it would not be simple for a government to implement the system. So obviously we do not have an example of this. So something we could do is use conditionals here. Like there isn't a one world government, so it's very difficult to talk about there being an example. So an example doesn't exist so much. Examples that we could do, and these are looking back to what you did already, thinking about like groups of country on a smaller world. So you could look at issues with Europe and the European Union, like trading blocs, like the North American trading blocs, any problems that they might have. Or you could think of just a condition. So if something happened in the future, what would happen? So what specific thing could be difficult to implement? So either using an example of a smaller group, as I said, like the European Union, or thinking about, you could talk about in the future, so if there was a one world government, what specific things would be very difficult to implement? So let's get one of each. I think that'd be quite good. So let's go with the European Union example. So if anyone in my chat can think about what has been difficult for the European Union to regulate as a trading bloc, as a unified group of countries. Okay, so Tamara was saying refugees. Okay, so how would we put that in an example? Or we can work this together. Let's do it together rather than just waiting for one person. So, simple. For example, now we were talking about European Union, so let's have that's going to be our topic, our subject. And what is the European Union? We could define it to be a bit more specific. Is a unified group of countries. Excellent. Okay, Tamara's got something here. Countries have to share responsibilities and resettle refugees. In the European Union, which is a unified group of countries, countries have to share responsibilities and resettle refugees, but nobody wants to take refugees to their country. Okay, so is this showing? So let's have a look. We've got a single government. And it's not easy to implement things. Okay. And then Tamara is saying we could be a bit more specific here. Nobody wants to take refugees to their country. Okay, so what do we think here? Is this addressing this issue? We've got a single government. It's difficult to implement the system. Yep. So definitely, this works. Then let's have a look at, sorry, I'm rushing since we're coming to the end of the lesson. The other idea I was saying about maybe using conditionals of what will be difficult in the future. So, for example, so we could do this for conditionals and we could say, for example, if there was one world they would struggle to implement but what would they struggle to implement policies on? How could we be quite specific here? Okay, yeah. So they would struggle to implement policies on health and education that were relevant to all countries in the world. Okay, so if there was a one world government, they would struggle to implement policies on health and education that were relevant to all countries in the world. Okay, so this is another way of looking at it. We could go, okay, this one world government doesn't exist, but we can use this kind of conditional idea of saying, well, if there was, this is what the problem is going to be, and we're going to have to be specific because it's an example. The policies about health and education in particular are going to be difficult for all the countries in the world. So these are two ways of approaching this second example. Okay, so that is all we have time for today. Thank you so much to all my students who have come along. Thank you to everyone who has been watching this on YouTube. I hope you found that useful. If you've got questions about anything, come along and join our Facebook group or leave them in the comments of this video. Good luck to everyone in your studies. Have a look in the YouTube channel for any challenges that we have about examples, because then you'll get practice. Remember, the best way for you to get better is practice, practice, practice. Okay, practice and get feedback. And we have lots of feedback challenges to help you do that. Thank you so much to everyone, and good luck in your studies.